We're saying this is both an extremely simple thing to do is to ask questions, but it's extremely sophisticated thinking skill that everyone can use and practice all the time. We're trying to make two arguments, which is don't overlook the fact that you can teach this foundational and sophisticated thinking skill to anybody, including people with maybe lower levels of literacy or who have less formal education. And it is a skill that you should be fostering at these other levels as well. Our work spans that whole range of fields and range of applications.
After that clip, you know the rest is going to be good. Please take 2 seconds to click the follow or subscribe button on your podcast player. You can set it once and forget tracking down each weekly episode. This makes your life easier and signals to the algorithms that the show should be recommended to other listeners. A simple act that can have an outsized positive impact on others. Now, let's get to it. Albert Einstein said, "Don't think about why you question, simply don't stop questioning." Welcome to Curated Questions. I am your host, Ken Woodward. And these questions are not mathematical equations, but rather a resource to encounter personal reflection and growth. As Tupac Shakur stated, even the genius asks questions. Now, let's engage the questioning community. Greetings. Ken Woodward here. Welcome back to another episode of Curated Questions. Together, we engage inquisitive humans about how they use questions to navigate and make sense of our world. I am a fellow traveler and pilgrim on this journey, and I'm glad you are here. Today's conversation is with Naomi Campbell. Naomi is the director of the Right Questions Institute, or RQI, Legal Empowerment Program. She is leading their efforts to promote the adoption of the Right Questions strategy in legal practice settings serving low-income communities. She is also a member of the Micro-Democracy team, collaborating on RQI's voter engagement, school-family partnerships, healthcare, and social services programs. Naomi has dedicated her career to helping people advocate for themselves and have a voice in decisions that affect them. She earned her JD from Harvard Law School, where she was a student attorney in the Immigration and Refugee Clinic, representing women from Central America in their asylum cases, and the Negotiation and Mediation Clinic, focusing on dispute systems design. She was a teaching assistant for Harvard Law School's negotiation workshop for cross-disciplinary negotiation courses. From 2017 to 18, Naomi was a legal fellow in Mexico City, where she supported migrant workers in defending their rights as they moved between their home communities in Mexico and their places of work in the United States. Naomi was admitted to the New York bar in 2018. In my early days of developing the Curated Questions project, I came across the Right Question Institute and was inspired by the work they have been doing. A shout out to Lynn Borton, host of the Choose to Be Curious radio show and podcast, for making the introductions. Naomi, welcome to Curated Questions.
Hi, Ken. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Good to have you here. I always like to start at the same point in the conversations, and that is to start with, when did you first understand the power of questions?
Yeah, so like many other people who probably end up on a podcast like this one, I probably was encouraged to ask questions as a child. I mean, I know I was encouraged to ask questions as a child, and I know curiosity was rewarded, and I was in a school environment where that happened. I was in classes where the people who asked good questions were rewarded. So I probably first really thought more clearly or concretely about it when I interned for the Right Question Institute, where I now work. And I was an intern nearly 15 years ago. And so that has shaped my work ever since and shaped the lens through which I see the world and see the power of questions. At the Right Question Institute, we have a strategy that helps teach other people how to ask their own questions, how to ask good questions, how to feel like they are able to ask questions, how to formulate questions. And that's applied in many different fields. And I think that that work and the internship with RQI made me realize that questions can do many things, including they can help you engage and learn and see things from a new angle. They can motivate you to take action. They can help you collaborate with other people. And they can also serve as sometimes the most effective form of advocacy, right? So they can help hold other people accountable. They can help you get the information you need. They can help you see where to go to get what you need. And so I realized through that not only the power of questions, but also realized that most people, and myself included, were focused on the questions they ask of other people as opposed to how do you help other people ask their own
Mm,
questions. So I took that with me when I went to law school and saw that questions were powerful there, and also that the most powerful people in law school and in the legal field were the ones asking the questions. So we were
mm.
kind of expected to emulate that. It was modeled for us, but we were not necessarily being deliberately taught how to ask good questions in law school. So that was another moment where I realized the power of questions and realized that the way that RQI worked had influenced the way that I see or operate and move through the world.
This is going to be a fun conversation. Okay, so I've got, oh boy. All right, so let's go back and let's touch on the growing up experience. So you said that questions were encouraged. What did that look like growing up for you? So, and where I'm going with this is that if it was a good model, right, where you now turn out to be a human that is inquiring or very inquisitive about the world, what were the things that you think your parents did right in helping you be inquisitive about the world or encourage that?
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's hard to pinpoint exactly where it comes
Mhm.
from. I think my
Sure.
parents valued curiosity, and so were excited when their kids were asking questions. I think that maybe even more importantly, well, I don't know, maybe equally importantly, I was in a school environment where teachers had somehow gotten the idea that like when students are asking questions, that means that they're engaged, that means that they want to learn more, and of course that is rewarded. So even if it's not always explicitly or deliberately encouraged, you get a reward when you're a curious child trying to ask questions in school. And so I was motivated to do well in school, and don't know whether that was the school environment or my family environment, but it came from somewhere. um,
Okay.
yeah, I will also say so. Maybe this is jumping ahead and related to another question you're going to ask, but I think a common thread that I can see in my career, in my life, is seeing the importance of agency. So, meaning, how do you help people feel and act on the idea that they have power, that their voice is important, that they have a right to have a voice? And how do you also change systems or environments or ways of working so that agency is not only respected but encouraged and expected? And so I think that probably comes from multiple things, but one of my siblings has multiple intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so I
Mm,
think it was instilled from an early age that there was the importance of voice and the importance of self advocacy. And I think in the disability rights world, especially self advocacy, self determination, agency are really important concepts. And so that's probably a thread that has followed me. And then making the connection between being able to ask questions, either being allowed to ask questions or feeling confident to ask questions or actually asking questions as a form of agency, as a form of self advocacy, is probably also where I learned that importance of questions, and that was instilled in me from growing up. So that might be a more significant thread, is that thread of feeling like agency was essential and important, and how do you foster it?
we will need to camp out on that as we go through the conversation because I won't jump ahead. There's so many things about that that I really appreciate.
Hmm.
And so let's plan on spending some time
Yeah,
really camping
maybe
out
I
on that
jumped
and
ahead.
really,
I can come
really
back
teasing that apart
to that. Great.
because yeah, resist the temptation. All right. So, what was it about the school? Were you in private school, public school? What did that look like such that the environment is what you encountered?
Yeah, I was in a public school system in the suburbs of Boston, and I think was a school system where a lot of parents came because they wanted their children to get a good education, and so maybe There was a certain environment of especially rewarding academic achievement. It was also a school system that had inclusive classrooms in elementary school, which was important in my family because it meant that my brother could be in the same school as the rest of us and could be part of the classroom. And so I think that was also a value in the school system of inclusion, of every voice is important, every child is important. And I think that also contributed to the positive environment and the environment where it meant that voice and questions were encouraged.
Okay. Excellent. And your brother, older, younger, and by how many years?
So he's the oldest by 4 years. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So just helping to understand the picture,
Yeah.
right? Of you're now witnessing how your older brother is treated versus if he was younger.
Yeah.
So
So
just
no, it really
helps fill out
matters.
the picture a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It matters.
Gotcha. All right. Let's jump forward to law school and the examples of professors or leaders asking questions. Can you describe some more about what that looked like and how that or why that resonated so deeply? And it may become more evident as you got to the RQI, but can you camp out a little bit on what that experience was like in what you witnessed?
Yeah, specifically in law school. Yeah, so legal education, people who have gone to law school definitely know this. People who haven't gone to law school maybe have picked up on it through popular culture, through television shows or movies, but a lot of legal education is based around the Socratic method, which basically means that a professor is usually cold calling, not always, sometimes getting somebody to volunteer to answer a question or letting them know ahead of time that they're going to be on the spot. But it usually involves a professor engaging with a student or multiple students where the professor is asking a series of questions and drawing the student out, getting them to think in a particular way, and getting them to try to use questions to get students to think like a lawyer, usually around a particular case that people have been reading. In my case, this looked like usually a class of 80 students and a teacher, a professor standing in the front of the room and calling on somebody randomly and then staying with them for 10 minutes, just asking questions and question after question and engaging them in that way. That's one piece of what you see in law school. Another piece of what you see and learn is you look at Supreme Court justices who are engaging with lawyers who are making arguments in front of them. And the Supreme Court justices are asking questions. They're trying to draw out the most persuasive arguments or trying to challenge certain pieces of arguments, and they're using questions to do so. And they are holding that power, and they are
Mm.
some of the most powerful people in our society. And you also see that in other parts of legal practice. Often briefs are framed with a question. So you have to come up with a question that frames your argument and frames your writing. So questions are kind of all around. You get questions in cross examination in the courtroom.
Mm.
And I think when I noticed, mostly because of what I had learned at the Right Question Institute, is who was holding that power. Who is holding the power of questions? It is the professor, it is the judges, it is the people who are framing the argument, who are directing the cross examination. And we, as lawyers or law students, were being maybe taught to ask questions simply by seeing other people ask questions. So we weren't
Okay.
being deliberately taught to ask our own questions. And we were never being taught how to share that power with maybe the communities or the people that we were serving as well. And so I think that was just the lens that I brought because I had worked at the Right Question Institute before going to law school. But that's what I noticed about questions in both legal education and in the legal field.
How did your fellow students handle that first year of
Oh, yeah. The first year is
you
a
know
notorious one for most people.
I mean,
Well,
you
I
know,
can tell you, I can tell you
you've
how
just
I
left high
handled it.
school and you're trying to go branch out in the big world, trying to get used to college, and then you're just getting
Yeah.
hammered in front of your peers. I'm thinking it would be crippling. So what did that look like?
Yeah, I can tell you how I handled the first year, which was not well. I think it is a unique pressure environment, and I think somebody described it as being thrown in the deep end of the pool and told swim, swim when you don't know how to swim. That's kind of the feeling that you
Hmm.
get in the first semester. And I think that's a fairly common experience, but I'm not alone in thinking this. I think there are things that could be done in legal education to make that not the case, but there is a lot of stuff that you just have to take in and you have to start to learn to think in a new way. And that's always going to be a very steep learning curve. But I think some of the ways that legal education is done is not conducive to lowering the anxiety levels of the students in the first year.
All right, we're going to figure out that attrition rate real quick then and weed folks out. Wow. Were there any particular professors, instructors, anyone that you just reflect back on and you're like, they were just remarkable, or their question insights were just remarkable? Anyone kind of check that or fill that bill?
I think less so an individual person and more so a program that was pretty formative was the negotiation workshop and the alternative dispute resolution world of programs at Harvard. So there's a workshop for students where they're taught how to negotiate, and that kind of feeds into other courses on how to do facilitation, how to facilitate conversations, and how to set up systems so that disputes are resolved not necessarily through the traditional legal system. And I think the reason I'm citing them is because I think I found people who really thought deeply and cared deeply about how to make sure everyone in a room was feeling valued or feeling heard, or setting up a system where people's insights are encouraged and therefore the systems are stronger. And so
Mm.
the facilitation principles behind that work, and also people thinking about how can you use questions, how do questions help people both feel and express empathy? So when you're listening to somebody else, when you're really listening to somebody else, what kinds of questions are you asking and how are questions important? And I think that was unique in my law school experience. So I think just those programs, that world, the clinic that I was a part of there, I think felt more similar in philosophy or approach to other places I had been that value questions as a form of engaging with the world.
Yeah, and your description there, um, empathy and Harvard law are not things that I would necessarily tie together. And this is only based on my exposure through TV or whatever, but that, uh,
I think that's right. I think that's right. Though I think the best lawyers know that empathy is a tool that they have to use to be good at their job, which includes being able to see multiple sides of a case, to being able to put yourself in the shoes of the other party so that you can make a better argument, so that you can advocate more effectively on behalf of your own client, because you need to be able to listen to your client, to the people that you work with, and therefore learn better. And so I think while the environment might not encourage necessarily empathy, I think the best people in the legal field know that that is an invaluable tool in their work.
so maybe it's just underrepresented
Yeah,
on TV
I
then,
think
or in the movies, or
so.
it doesn't include as many gunfights and whatever it is.
The
So,
movies get some things right, but
all right. So then you wrapped up law school and then decide to come back to the Right Question Institute. Is that right?
so I first spent a couple of years in Mexico City working at a
That's right.
migrant worker rights organization. And this particular organization, Centro de los Derechos del Migrante in Mexico City, it's a binational organization based in Mexico and the US. And they support migrant workers, mostly people with temporary work visas, but anybody who has experienced any kind of employment or labor law violation in their place of work in the United States. And often people in these programs are a very vulnerable workforce because for many reasons, as you can imagine, but usually they're moving between their home communities and the US throughout the year. So they'll go back and forth, and it's very easy to either not pay people or to take away people's passports or not give them fresh drinking water or do all sorts of things, especially in low wage labor environments. But what I appreciated about this organization too is that they have a workers committee, so a committee of people who themselves were or are migrant workers and can inform the work of the organization and are a part of setting that direction. So that I did that for a little less than 2 years, and then came back to the Right Question Institute to start to work on different projects, but then also start the legal program at RQI.
Okay. So, what was it that drew you to that role down in Mexico City?
I think a couple things. I mean, I was interested in practicing law for a time period, actually using my legal license. The role that I have at RQI right now is an unusual lawyer job in that way. So practicing law, I liked the approach that the organization took. I thought I could learn a lot, and I did learn a lot from doing employment law and labor law, and working at a binational organization or an international organization, but actually using my legal license to practice in U.S. courts. I think that was a part of the appeal.
Not that we're necessarily trying to connect dots, but just kind of seeing this through line of how the influence of your brother and the advocacy that we'll be talking about, and just looking out, like really looking out for kind of the disenfranchised, seems to be, at least in talking with you, reading a little bit of your bio, it seems like that very much a part of your heart or just who you are. Because at this point, you probably had the choice to go and represent big corporations or other angles in the legal field, but that you've chosen this one. So, wow.
Yeah, I found those questions to be more interesting. We can put it that way. We could say that the questions that I've been able to work on have been more interesting and challenging to me. But I think, yeah, I think that is probably a through line that you've identified.
You just mentioned something there that is interesting. You say that the questions are more interesting in the path that you've chosen.
To me.
Right,
They
right,
may
right.
not be
To
other
to you.
people. Yeah.
And I just find that intriguing in that I've moved through the world in a way that says, because of scarcity in my upbringing, where it's been, what's going to make you the most money? Now, my role has been in various, working for the Navy, so it wasn't necessarily driving for the biggest dollar, but that's been my mindset. And I love the fact that your worldview was, I want to go pursue interesting questions. Just that idea of, I want to spend my life pursuing the questions that intrigue me. I mean, is that common with your peers?
Yeah, we're going into territory where I feel like I don't know the answers. I don't necessarily
Sweet. All
have
right.
have the expertise to say. I think, I think there's a lot of interesting work to be done in the legal field, and that can correlate to making money or not to making money, and making money or going after other reasons to have a career or to have a certain job are perfectly legitimate. But I think many people are saying, okay, this field interests me more. The questions that are being asked in this field interest me,
Yeah.
whether that's in intellectual property, whether that's questions about AI and the legal ramifications of AI. There's lots of questions that could be drawing people to those fields that also happen to correlate with taking a job at a firm. So I guess I don't know if I can speak for for my generation of lawyers. All I can do is say that I think I would be pretty unhappy in other environments as opposed to where I am now. I think
That
also some people end up practicing law for many years. And I think the systems that I was seeing, the types of cases that I was working on, those systems can be pretty grim for the people who are in them. And it can take a lot of resilience and a lot of grit to stay practicing law in those
mm,
fields for as long as some people do. So, for example, people who do immigration law right now, but at any time almost in history, it can be brutal to be practicing for that long and to see systems at work against the people that you're representing and to see the outcomes being what they are. So I think that's another reason where I appreciate having a law license or having gotten a law degree and having practiced, but also appreciate being almost one step removed, where I'm helping people who are in the legal field. I'm helping people who work in these different areas work with their clients, but it's almost at a bigger picture level. And I think I'm grateful for that position, to,
Hmm. Gotcha.
if that makes sense.
It's just, yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It's just a neat distinction because I hadn't really thought about saying, yes, I want to work in whatever field because I'm interested in the questions,
Mm.
or
Yeah.
I'm interested in wrestling through whatever questions
Yeah. The unknown in that field. Yeah.
exist in this field. That's cool.
Mm.
Let's come to the Right Question Institute. So if we maybe get an overview and then some of the different programs, then we'll be able to start to dive into some of those.
Yeah. The Right Question Institute is a nonprofit organization, and we are unusual in that we are dedicated to the idea that if you can teach people how to ask their own questions, that is a transformational skill. And that can help people think better, learn better. It can help people take action on their own behalf. It can help people advocate for themselves. It can help people navigate different systems. And our work is based around the idea that you can deliberately teach this skill, and that we have worked on over many years a method for teaching this skill. And people use the method in different fields to teach the skill to the people that they serve. So, like I said, we're kind of one step removed from the ultimate people that are using the skill or learning how to ask their own questions. So, for example, we are teaching lawyers how to teach clients, or how to help clients ask questions in the course of their representation, ask questions as a form of advocacy when they don't have a lawyer present. We are teaching healthcare providers how to help patients ask questions of their doctors. We are teaching classroom educators how to help students ask questions in the classroom. And all of this work actually came out of work where we learned a very important lesson. And we were working in communities where we were trying to help people advocate for their children in the school system. And people were saying, we don't even enter the schools, we don't even go to the schools because we don't even know what questions to ask.
Mm.
And we learned that these people were naming something that no one else was naming and that was overlooked, which is that people often feel like they don't know what questions to ask, or they feel like they don't necessarily have a right to ask questions, or they don't know how to ask questions. And the original solution to that problem was, okay, great, we're going to tell you what questions to ask in this particular situation. And of course, that is not a sustainable solution to that problem. You have to
Mm.
figure out how to help people use that skill and feel confident in using that skill no matter the setting or situation. And the communities that we were working in started showing, once they were developing that skill and using and feeling confident with the skill of asking questions, they started using it in all of their interactions where decisions were being made that affected them. And that kind of led to our work in these different fields. So we were following an insight from the communities that we were working in and following how they then used the skill in different ways. So our programs range from, we have a large presence in the world of education, of classroom education. So our co-founders wrote a book in 2011 called Make Just One Change, Teach Students to Ask Their Own Questions. And it lays out how educators can share the power of questions, can teach students how to drive their own learning, how to feel agency in the classroom, how to ask questions in the classroom. And so that's been adopted by hundreds of thousands of educators, not only in the US, but around the world. So that's one large piece of what we do, is that work in education. And then what I and my colleagues do is work with direct service providers, whether that's legal professionals, community organizers, community outreach workers, healthcare providers, other direct services, government agencies, and teach them this method for helping clients or people navigating systems feel more agency and feel like they're partnering effectively with a service provider, that they're able to ask questions, that they're able to get the information they need, and building that skill for advocacy that they can take with them into different settings where decisions are being made that affect them. So happy to go into any of those programs, but that's kind of the origin of our work and also the main focus areas of our work.
And I'm grateful for your work
Thank you.
because I just I get emotional just thinking about how those without power can use this to find a voice. They may be speaking with a trembling voice because they don't because all the systems in place, all those that are sitting behind the desk on the riser or they have a tie on or whatever, and these folks, they need to express a concern. They need to express themselves. And all these other systems are in place that will say, be quiet. You don't know best. I know best. I am grateful for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
That is for sure. Can you share one example of how this works specifically?
Yeah, yeah. Happy to share.
Just choose one of the 10,000, but this way for listeners, there's an anchoring point to go, okay, yes, I see how this works.
Yeah, and there's so many examples I could share. I'm wondering if I can share kind of three different examples in different settings, and
Sure.
you could
Yeah,
use one of them or none of them, or
that'll work.
so one example is we might train a social worker who is working at a legal aid organization. And in this particular case, this was a social worker who was working in a primarily rural state and working with youth who were homeless or at risk of homelessness. And they had various legal issues. And so she would kind of prepare them to meet with an attorney or to get services outside of the legal aid organization. Often when she meets with her clients, clients are extremely overwhelmed, they're shut down, they're experiencing a lot of what life has thrown at them all at once. And so in this particular case, a young woman that I'm thinking of, the many times that she's used this method, is a young woman who had to develop a parenting plan so that she could keep custody of her child and not lose custody to the child's father's parents. And she was preparing to walk into a meeting and she was shut down, overwhelmed. And so the social worker used a prompt. Basically, you have to develop a parenting plan, or she used a prompt also, you're walking into a meeting with an attorney. And then she took this young person through a process of asking as many questions as she could, not censoring herself, just going through a process of writing down any questions that came to mind, then looking at different questions, working with those questions and prioritizing her questions and reflecting on what she learned through the process of coming up with questions. And what she saw was
Mm,
this young person had a new sense of confidence and power, a sense of being able to identify her goals walking into a meeting with an attorney. So she had a set of questions that she wanted to ask the attorney. And that led to a more productive conversation where essentially the attorney agreed to represent her because she knew what she wanted out of the meeting with the attorney. And she had
mm,
a new sense of, I have a right to talk with this attorney, and I have an agenda, and I have these questions that I need answers to. And so she's used it with various clients, including a young man who was going into court to represent himself in an emancipation hearing. Helping him prepare questions for the judge was another way that she used this process. That's one example of somebody who really cares about the agency of the people that they're serving, that kind of say, I always want my clients to be able to ask questions, to feel confident in asking questions. I just didn't have a method to use or a tool. And so this gives me a tool to help make that a reality. Another example from a different corner of the world is we worked recently with folks in Rhode Island who are case managers for the SNAP employment and training programs. SNAP being the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program that was formerly known as food stamps. And there are programs that help people get job training or employment assistance as part of the SNAP program. And what we were doing is training case managers who wanted to help their clients go more into problem solving and being able to, you know, ask questions in a job interview or ask questions to get what they needed out of these programs. And so one particular example I'm thinking of is a financial literacy coach who has been using this process to help people think through problems that they bring him around their finances. So the
Mm.
problem might be, I don't have enough in my savings account, or I have trouble getting transportation. And he walks them through this process to help them think about next steps and to problem solve through asking their questions. So then instead of him telling them or asking them questions to help get them thinking, they're starting to do that thinking on their own. And then they can use services more effectively and get what they need more effectively. So that's one other example. And then I'm inundating you with examples, but a third one that
I'm loving it.
I like to cite because it's an example of using this process in a more collective action setting. A parent liaison and outreach worker who was in New Mexico working with primarily Spanish speaking parents, and often parents who had never set foot inside their children's school, and for various reasons, including the feeling that they were not necessarily welcome in those schools. But there was an incident at the school where a child had brought a gun to school in their bag and had shot another child. It wasn't at a large scale, but it obviously frightened the parents a lot and made them think about how violence was happening in the school district. This parent liaison gathered parents at his house and helped them go through a process of asking questions. He used what we call a question focus or a prompt for the questions. And that prompt was a shooting at our kids' school. It was as simple as that, just prompting the parents to think of any questions they had about a shooting at our kids' school. And the parents started asking questions, and they eventually got to the question, what is the school going to do to prevent this? And what are we going to do to prevent this from happening again in the future? This led to a meeting where more parents were coming up with their questions. That led to a meeting with both the principal and the superintendent. The parents, in asking their questions, realized that actually there were decisions being made in the school committee, in the city council. And so they started using their questions to go and advocate in these other spaces. And what they were able to do was to secure more after school busing, violence prevention programs. And I think one of the parents actually ran for city council at that point. And I think questions in this case were a way to help people hold decision makers accountable and also understand where decisions were being made and how they could have a voice in those decisions. So that's an example of where kind of it can spur collective action or help guide collective action in a more organizing context.
Please take 2 seconds to click the follow or subscribe button on your podcast player. You can set it once and forget tracking down each weekly episode. This makes your life easier and signals to the algorithms that the show should be recommended to other listeners. A simple act that can have an outsized positive impact on others. As I'm thinking in those examples, it really is empowering those that are coming from a position of little power. And most listeners are probably more accustomed to being in positions of power and to consider the important role that empowering others to have this skill, because as I've talked many times, questioning really is a skill, so folks can learn it. And what RQI is doing is giving that framework or that foundation to say, here you go, let's recognize it as a skill. Here's some training wheels, right, that you can get started with so we can start some practice with it. And then the time is going to come where, yeah, you take the training wheels off and now you're good to go out and go fast through the world that you experience. And so I just really appreciate the fact that you really are helping those that in most cases don't have a voice or don't recognize that they have that voice. Coming back to that sense of agency that we were talking about previously, it seems that's kind of the common word
Yeah,
that we're encountering.
yeah, a couple of things. I think our goal is to not only help people start to develop the skill to feel that agency, but also to change the way that systems operate and that people do their job so that it encourages agency. So there's kind of a dual problem that we're trying to solve there. I would be remiss not to talk about our work in higher education and in research, where these methods have been adopted to help researchers ask better research questions, doctoral students to ask better questions. And we at RQI use it internally to unpack problems that we have as an organization or to collaborate around different projects. And so it's a challenge for us in that we're saying this is both an extremely simple thing to do is to ask questions,
Hmm.
but it's extremely sophisticated thinking skill that everyone can use and practice all the time. We're trying to make two arguments, which is don't overlook the fact that you can teach this foundational and sophisticated thinking skill to anybody, including people with maybe lower levels of literacy or who have less formal education. And it is a skill that you should be fostering at these other levels as well. Our work spans that whole range of fields and range of applications. It's actually a challenge for us to make the case for what we do. But I think to your point about listeners maybe not understanding some barriers that other people face, I like to cite our work in healthcare, where we work with patients who will often say, I didn't know I was allowed to ask questions of the doctor.
Hmm.
I didn't know I should ask questions of the doctor. And I didn't know that decisions were made when I see the doctor. And to
Wow.
unpack that last one, I think people sometimes don't realize that a doctor is making a choice about how to proceed. There's not a single solution to a problem, but in fact, there are multiple options that a doctor is choosing from, whether it's this medication or that medication, or surgical intervention or not surgical intervention, or this lifestyle change or this lifestyle change. And I think unveiling that is something that is necessary, and that people who are used to advocating for themselves at the doctor's office don't necessarily see that barrier. It's an overlooked barrier, maybe, for them.
Not to tell on yourselves, but what does it look like for the RQI team to be wrestling through some hard spots, trying to come up with the good questions, going down a path, and then realizing 10 minutes into the conversation, dang, we weren't even using our own principles? Has that happened, or has your humanity shown up in an organization that's working with questions?
Yeah, I think all the time we're kind of iterating and going back and saying, oh, we got this wrong, or we could say this in a better way. I think the two lessons that I think are so formative to the organization were mistakes that we
Hmm.
made. So the first one that I was talking about earlier, which is, okay, great, we're going to solve your problem by telling you what to say, like giving you a list of questions. That was a big mistake that we had to learn from, and that's how you find other ways of working. That's how you grow. I think another mistake, and I don't know if this is exactly what you're asking, but another big formative mistake was that we were working with adult educators, so people who teach GED classes, who teach adult literacy, teach English to adult learners, and we were giving them 2 or 3 day workshops on self advocacy. And they turned around and told us, we don't have time for this. We don't have time to dedicate 2 to 3 days on a self advocacy workshop. But I took this piece of what you taught me and I taught it in 20 minutes, or I taught it in 10 minutes when I was working one on one with an adult learner. And so I think the early RQI had to get over people, quote unquote, touching our stuff and using it in ways that maybe we hadn't anticipated. And oh no, you can't change it. You can't do it out of order. But if you just listen to the field and to what people need, and to them saying, this is too much, or I have to use it in this way, or this is the problem that I'm facing that you don't understand, I think we landed on a better method because of the people who shaped that method by touching it, by changing it, by implementing it. So we've definitely had moments where we're like, oh, we don't know what we are talking about. We have to learn. We have to learn more. I'll just give an example of where we've used the method. I think we've used the method in the past. A lot of our partners have a shifting landscape underneath them right now, whether that's a funding landscape or the way that they should be doing their work. And so we've used our own methods to ask questions about how we can better support our partners in this current context. Um,
Hmm.
but I don't know if I can cite a specific question that we maybe didn't ask ourselves in that moment. Maybe we haven't found, maybe we have yet to discover the things that we're not asking that we should be asking.
To me, it's more about since you're working in the field of questions,
Mhm.
that it is an iterative process.
Yeah.
So as you work at them, you can find that you can refine them, get better at them, just as it's a very meta skill in that you're teaching it, but you're also, it's all this virtuous cycle, if you will. You're always trying to get to better and better questions and really get to what's at the core. As the name of curated questions, there's an implication there that says that curation is happening. So something is better than others.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
my view has been, let me provide out examples of perhaps better questions or those that I've found valuable as a starting point, and such that now you can see, all right, well, let's take this and then see how you can make it on your own and wrestle with it and kind of work and figure out whatever your own questions are. On the website, I've got several different categories, but one of them is regarding job interviews for both sides of the table. And the example that I cite was through an online interaction, a new friend had posted, I'm going to a job interview tomorrow. Does anybody have any good questions I should ask? And I said, as a matter of fact, go look over here. The idea behind it was go read through these questions for both sides of the table such that it might inspire you and give you courage to ask questions that you might not have thought about before,
Mhm.
and kind of allow you to sit in the space of, if I read this question and I'm like, dang, I wouldn't have the guts to ask that question. But now you've already kind of felt a little bit in your body and you're
Mhm.
like, maybe I might be willing to ask the question. The employer said her questions were remarkable and she ended up getting the job. That was a great inspiration to say, this is an idea of how this could be worked, right? So it's go spend some time with the questions and then iterate them, right? Make them your own. What am I really concerned about? Where it might not be the health insurance question that I'm concerned about, but I'm concerned about this other issue or other element. At least now it kind of gets the juices flowing, if you will,
Mhm.
to start thinking about what matters to you.
Yeah. I mean, I think too, what you're talking about is, helping people feel like a license to ask questions, almost
Yeah.
permission. And so it's modeling the fact that, if somebody over here is asking this question, maybe I can ask this question too. And I think I would just add the way that our work might add to what are the questions that somebody else has come up with that are great questions to ask in a job interview is how how do you do that iteration, and how do
Mm,
you ask questions that are, nobody can give this person questions that are exactly specific to her skill set, the job that she's applying for, something
right.
that specific that organization is facing. And those can be some of the most impressive job interview questions, at least in my experience, is not kind of a question that could be asked in any job interview, but in fact a question that shows that the person can ask good questions about the problem in front of them. And so how to,
Mm,
asking or showing that you can ask certain kinds of questions in a job interview might open that door. And then how you help people iterate and how you help people use that muscle or develop that skill, so that no matter the job interview, they're asking something that shows that they have that skill on their own. So that the step that I would add to somebody
mhm.
who is coming to you or to that curated list for inspiration and almost for permission to ask a question, and then like how do you iterate on that, I think is the next step.
Absolutely. And I had spoken with Kevin Kelly on the podcast not too long ago, and his position was most questions aren't good. It
Mhm.
takes the iteration to be able to find the good question, to really get to it. But it takes that iteration. So that means that you're going to, if you're writing them down, the expectation is you're going to write a lot of crap but before you get to the good ones.
Yeah, and
Um,
that's part of the process that we teach, is to write down all questions that come to mind or that are stated. Turn any statement into a question. Do not stop to judge, answer, discuss any question, because you have to go through that generative phase. You have to think divergently in order to maybe stumble upon something that you hadn't thought of before. And then you can do the convergent thinking. Then you can edit the questions, then you can prioritize the questions. But you have to be able to do that wide thinking, the divergent thinking first. So definitely agree with Kevin. And as much as I say our school system encouraged questions, I think it encouraged questions, certain kinds of questions, and encouraged questions from certain kinds
Yeah.
of students. And so it was not any question is valid kind of environment, but it didn't necessarily provide a space to come up with any question and then to work on those questions. Instead, it was like, oh, you have to end up at the right question at the first time you open your mouth. And so I think that
Yeah.
can stymie a lot of thinking and certain ways of thinking too, or ways that certain people think. Yeah.
That would be That'd be kind of a fun exercise, I think, for folks to consider. If you've got kids or for anybody, but I'm certainly thinking with kids, is just to around the dinner table, iterate on a question, come up with some problem and just keep iterating on what are the questions that we could do about this? How
Mhm.
how could it be a better question? How could it be a worse question? Right. And just play with that because to your point, if you're now a seventh grader, you're raising your hand and the pressure is on you to ask the perfect question
Mhm.
at the jump. Um, yeah, it's probably not going to go well. And so to get those reps and sets at home or with your friends, playing around with the questions to see how you can make them more effective
Mhm.
is a great exercise to be able to do it without the pressure on.
Yeah. I'm not on our teaching and learning team, the team that works in classroom education, but I know that a lot of teachers use this process in the classroom, and they allow the kids that they're teaching to get some of that silly energy out because they're allowed to ask whatever they want. And sometimes a kid will throw up a question that they know is silly, and it just kind of gets that energy out, and then it focuses kids on maybe what's right in front of them. But I think sometimes teachers are afraid, what if they're asking questions that are in a direction that don't want them to go? Well, you do that divergent thinking and then you bring them back. You give them instructions on how to choose the question or how to improve the question. Um, but yeah, I like the idea of having people iterating on a question and thinking about what makes a good question.
So, was that kind of thinking? Did you experience that divergent or the iterating on questions going through school?
Honestly, I don't think so. I mean, I think sometimes we would frame a question as part of a thesis statement or in an essay, and then we get edits on that question. But I think deliberately working on a question, I'm not sure. And I think there are models in
Hmm.
education that are all around teacher questions, right? So
Yeah.
essential questions is, you have an essential question that guides the class, and the teacher has to come up with this perfect question that guides all of the learning in the class for the year, or
No pressure.
whatever it
No
is.
pressure.
No pressure at all, or the perfect question to engage the students. And so the teacher might be iterating behind the scenes on that question, but then it's not about the students doing that iteration, or that iteration isn't necessarily visible to the students. So I don't know if I can think of an example where I was really deliberately iterating on questions other than, maybe asking a question, then realizing it wasn't the question that I actually had, or it led to another question
Hmm.
in a more informal way.
What kind of things are you excited about for RQI in the next year or two? Or the things that you're working on?
Hmm. Well, one thing that we're doing is we're having conversations with different people in what I would call the access to justice world. So people who think about the fact that many more people have legal problems, especially civil legal problems, non-criminal cases, but let's say housing, domestic violence, other family law, consumer debt, all of those problems. Many more people have legal problems than have access to representation by a lawyer.
Hmm.
So whether
Okay.
that's the number of lawyers that are available, that's one issue, and also how people think, oh, I have a legal problem, I better contact a lawyer. There's a disconnect there. So these are people who are trying to close that gap between people who have a justice need or a legal need and the people who are able to get help for it. And we're talking about how can you use the existing resources to help people advocate alongside a lawyer or advocate in addition to a lawyer and help close that gap. So there's lots of different programs that are working on that, but some programs are training what are called community justice workers. So these are people who are not lawyers, not trained, not licensed to practice law, but are able to help people in a limited way, navigate the legal system or understand their legal rights. And as part of that, we're working to say, okay, you can also teach people these two fundamental skills, which is to be able to formulate questions, but also to understand when decisions are being made and how to ask questions about specific aspects of a decision. And so that's something that I didn't touch on before. Part of our method is when a decision is being made, how do you help people ask questions about the reasons for that decision, the process for making a decision, and the role that they play in a decision making process. And if you
Hmm.
ask questions about those three elements, you're going to be a more effective advocate. So maybe that's a little bit of a nebulous answer, but the people who are working on access to justice in this country, working with a coalition of people who are doing that is exciting and very interesting to us. The co-founders of the organization and I are working on a book on sharing the power of questions. And so it's a book that expands from our work on classroom education and says what happens when you share the power of questions and how can that improve thinking, how can it improve advocacy, how can it improve democracy. And so that project is important and exciting as well. So probably those two.
Gotcha. Well, that book is rather timely, unfortunately,
Yes.
on
Yeah. Yeah.
on how are you seeing the importance of questions in relation to democracy?
Hmm.
Nice lighthearted question for
Yeah,
you.
nice. I mean, you use the word hopeful. What is making you hopeful about argument? I will say, I think of course, I'm biased, but I believe that the work on teaching people how to formulate questions is very timely because of the connection to strengthening democracy. So it's connected in a few different ways. We believe that formulating questions, asking questions is an essential skill to participate in a democracy, to participate in decisions. I mean, that's kind of the definition of democracy is if you're able to actually have a voice in the decisions that affect you. And so if you're not allowed to ask questions, or if you don't ask questions, or if you don't know how to ask questions, all of those are detrimental to democracy. So if we can
Hmm.
build this skill in students, if we can build this skill in adults, if we can build this skill in anybody who's operating in society, that is in fact a democratic skill that can strengthen democracy because it can be used to participate, to hold people accountable, to kind of activate people's motivation to have a voice in a decision. So that's one way we see it as connected to democracy. The other way that we see our work as connected to democracy is that we're helping people teach this skill in lots of different direct services that may have ties to government agencies that are funded by public dollars and are connected to decisions made elsewhere in our democracy. So let's say you help somebody understand a decision being made at the welfare office and be able to ask questions about that decision. Not only does that interaction at the welfare office have democratic significance because the welfare office only exists because of decisions made elsewhere in democracy, it's a public
Yeah.
space, it's a public institution, but also if you can help people start participating in decisions at the welfare office, you can help them make connections to decisions being made elsewhere, and it can be a pathway to start to participate elsewhere. So
Hmm.
I'll say often people might not see the value in voting or in contacting an elected official, but it's because they don't necessarily see the connection between decisions made in those spaces and their experience in the welfare office. And I think now we are seeing obviously a huge amount of changes in these different landscapes, especially in direct services and public agencies and state funded programs and federally funded programs. And so if you can get people to start asking questions, you can help them understand the bigger picture of what's going on and to participate at the macro level. So this is a concept that we call micro democracy. So micro democracy are people participating in those ordinary encounters they might have with public
Hmm.
institutions.
All those different kind of touch points. Okay.
Yeah. So micro democracy can lead to participation in the macro, in the big, the more traditional forms of democratic participation that you might think about, like voting. So that's another way that we connect our work to democracy. And I think, yeah, I mean, I could go on and on, but
All right. So then, not to add more to your plate, but do you have any particular initiatives working on combating misinformation and disinformation?
not explicitly, though.
Okay.
What we see is in teaching this skill in schools, you are helping teach critical thinking skills, and
Yeah.
you're helping teach people to question information that they see. So there's not a specific initiative that we have on that, but we believe that you have to start at that foundational level of building that critical thinking, building that ability to question, that instinct to question, and then down the line you're combating specific forms of disinformation.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And like I say, not trying to add anything more to your plate. Now, there's other organizations that are working on that specifically, but
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
As you can probably gather, we're a very ambitious organization for a small operation.
willing to take on the world. Yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
What questions are underutilized when engaging the communities you're serving? So it goes down the question of ineffective or bad questions, or what's out there in the ecosphere that isn't necessarily helpful or useful.
So I think this is kind of answering the question, and it's maybe reframing the question a little bit. But I think that questions are utilized ineffectively, or not ineffectively, but uh, are insufficient because they are just used to ask questions of other people. So let me rephrase
Mm,
that. I
yeah.
think that only some people are asking the questions. So, the typical way that we are taught in the legal field is, I will ask questions of a potential client. I will ask them what brings you here today, but then do a whole intake by asking them questions. I will ask questions and direct an interaction with people. But I am not trained to say, okay, not only what questions do you have, but how can I help you ask questions? People are very focused on the questions they're asking, and they're not focused on how do I help the people that I'm trying to serve ask questions. And so I think for me, it becomes an equity issue. So who gets to
Yeah.
ask the questions, who in fact asks the questions, and who doesn't ask the questions. For people who are thinking about equity, who are thinking about power sharing, I think that's the way that questions are not sufficiently being used, is that you're not sharing that power.
Hmm. It's a beautiful insight.
It's
Not sharing the
slightly
power.
dodging your your exact question, I would say.
No, I mean, I just appreciate the insight. I will often, at the end of a conversation with an organization, I'll ask the question, so what questions didn't I ask? What questions should I have asked? I'm looking for the insight from whoever is doing this stuff all day, every day. They know all the best questions. The organization has been working on lots of different things. Have there been any areas where you thought there was going to be more of a response or a richer return on investment,
Mm,
or for lack of a better term, characterizing it?
yeah.
Anything like that happen?
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because we've done work in healthcare. We've done work with various healthcare organizations. We've taught community health workers. We've partnered with different organizations. It is the only field where we have randomized control trials showing impact of our work on patient activation measures, is what it's called in healthcare, or other healthcare measures. So very, very rigorous randomized control trials as opposed to other forms of evidence is in the healthcare field. So you'd think that people would be jumping on that and saying there's evidence that this works, this is how it works, and we want to expand this. And so I think that maybe this is a result of me not understanding healthcare systems, but maybe I think healthcare systems are a little less flexible in the way that they're able to change, and the way that they're able to change quickly. And so in spite of our partnerships or our strengths in the field of healthcare, I think change has been slower to happen than I might have expected otherwise. Whereas
Hmm.
change in a place like classroom education, a lot of teachers have while they have curriculum that they have to teach, content that they have to deliver, they may have more individual autonomy in how they operate in the classroom, whereas a healthcare system is kind of slow moving and connected in many different parts and ways. And so we have yet to see kind of widespread adoption in healthcare. And more so, we've seen that more so in other fields.
I wonder if there's any hidden disincentives
Mm.
on the healthcare side.
I imagine there are. I
Huh.
mean, it is a question of power sometimes, right? I think the argument, and we believe in, not just make this argument, that healthcare would be more effective because you're partnering more effectively with a patient when they are asking questions, when they're engaged, than otherwise. As in, you will get to the outcomes that you say that you care about more quickly, more efficiently, more effectively because you're using a method like this one. I think there are constraints in the healthcare system, for example, the amount of time that people can spend with a patient that makes it harder to adopt a method. So, what we've had to do is say, okay, how can you teach this in 10 minutes to patients in the waiting room so that they're prepared with their 3 questions when they go in and see the doctor? But that requires
Yeah.
coordination between the different elements. It's not just a teacher teaching it in their classroom and then using the questions. It's a patient learning it, learning something over here, and then a doctor being prepared to field those questions on the other end. So that's one barrier, is just the time constraints that are in the healthcare field, the resource constraints, but maybe the less of a prioritization of patient activation or patient empowerment, as you might call it, in healthcare.
As I've encountered various healthcare things in my life, trying to think through the myriad of questions that I should be asking when, yeah, I'll go out and look at the Google Oracle and try to learn all I can and find out that this cough is going to kill me 75 different ways and and then dive through the conspiracy theories to finally get to figuring out what are the right questions. And it's almost an overwhelm
Hmm.
from what you encounter online. So yeah, so how do you figure out what my questions are, what my real concerns are,
And what
and
you have
collapse those
time to
down to a
ask.
few?
Yeah, what you have
Yeah.
time to ask a busy doctor whose hand is on the door when, any questions as they're leaving the exam room. So I think
Any
we've
questions?
all had
Didn't think
that.
so. Thank you. All right.
Yeah,
Whoa, wait a second.
it's a universal experience that we've all been like, I should have asked that question when I, and I didn't ask that question when I was in the doctor's office. And so, yeah, that's the problem we're trying to solve.
Yeah. So that's why I appreciate a little bit of the framework and kind of those categories that you've got in your curriculum, whereby at least it's kind of chunked, right?
Hmm.
Consider things in these different areas anyway. So
Hmm.
now if you come in and if you think of, all right, I'm going to have 2 questions, or let me think ahead, if I can come up with a couple questions in each of these areas, then there's at least something to go on, or at least perhaps it's a conversation and not just a yes, no with the doctor.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other piece that we teach in the framework is what's the difference between a closed and an open-ended question. So a
Mm,
closed-ended question that can be answered with yes, no, one word, open-ended questions which require more explanation. And what are the advantages and disadvantages of both types of questions, and how can you use them strategically? So people will work with their questions and say, oh, well, this was closed ended, but what I actually wanted was an open ended, I wanted the answer to this open ended question. Or I need to be able to, pin something down with a closed ended question so that I can get to another question. And yeah, I think that has particular use in the healthcare field where you might have limited time. So, how do you order your questions? How do you use closed and open ended questions? It's another framework for people to use to think about.
your work is exciting because it's giving intention for folks to work with questions.
Hmm.
So now, mental space, right? It's like, okay, yes, questions are a skill. I can spend time, I can be intentional about it. Here's a framework. Great. Let me spend some actual mental space on this, which means that there's time involved with it, whether it's, you're talking into your phone with AI, but at least it's, let me think ahead. Let me think about how I can move through the world and bringing my questions, my concerns into the circumstance, and that there's just that intentionality about it.
Hmm.
As you knew that we were going to be having the conversation about questions, has there been any things that we haven't touched on regarding questions that you're like, we better talk about this? Otherwise, I'm pulling Ken up short on this. Anything come to mind at all?
I think I touched briefly on this, but it might have been a little buried, which is that our methods teach the skill of question formulation, and there are a couple of methods to do that. And the second method is around how do you ask questions about decisions? And
Mm,
a decision might be being made. And we usually provide a very simple definition of decision, in part because people might say, I didn't know what a decision was. And the decision is the choice of one option among two or more options. And when that is happening, you should be asking questions. And what questions do you have? And people prioritize their questions. And then they also think about which questions of mine have to do with the reason behind the decision, the why behind the decision. What questions have to do with the process for making the decision? So, how was the
mm,
decision made? Who was involved? What information was used, etc.? When was it made? What meeting was held? And what role do I have? What the role of the people who are affected by the decision? Questions about that. And I think most people will come up with reason questions, but most people will say their instinct in asking questions about a decision is, the first question they have is, why was this decision made? Most people will have that. People have a harder time finding a question about process, because it's usually just about dealing with the consequences of a decision and not, okay, rewind, how did you come to this decision? Or
yeah.
how might you come to this decision? And often people who are used to being subject to the decisions of others will not have a question on their list about role. They will not necessarily say, what can I do in this situation? So the doctor is making a decision. What can I do to better follow the doctor's instructions? Or what can I do if my child is struggling in school? Those questions are often absent from the list. And so
Mm,
I think that framework we use about reason, process, and role can unpack any decision, can help people be more effective in participating in decisions. And that's where I see also the connection to democracy. There must be legitimate reasons for a decision in a democracy. It can't be
right.
arbitrary, it can't be random. There must be a transparent process in decision making in a democracy. The process for having made the decision must be open, transparent to all. And there must be opportunities for participation or a role for the people affected by a decision in the decision making process. So those corresponds to what is essential for decision making in a democracy.
Mm.
So I think that's a better explanation of what I was trying to say before about questions about decisions.
Please take 2 seconds to click the follow or subscribe button on your podcast player. You can set it once and forget tracking down each weekly episode. This makes your life easier and signals to the algorithms that the show should be recommended to other listeners. A simple act that can have an outsized positive impact on others. I just really appreciate the thought and the framework that goes behind it, because now, as we're witnessing the changes that are happening, it gives us the ability to do critical thinking and look and see how these things are happening and saying, is there the transparency that's supposed to be happening?
Mm-hmm.
Are people having a voice that's supposed to be happening? And then that can help determine whether the democracy is thriving or struggling.
Yeah. I mean, if we can all agree that these principles of legitimacy, transparency, and opportunities for participation are essential to have a democracy, and we can see that one of those is missing, then it can help people act on the idea that we are not having a decision making in a full participatory sense.
Yeah. And if you are on the side of saying that everything is operating as it should, and you're confused as to why there's blowback from for lack of a better term, the opponents or the people on the other side, then perhaps look at these three elements and go, do they have a case here? Or how might that be true for them looking at this on those three different categories?
If
So,
yeah, if we say we care about democracy and we actually do care about democracy, how do we uphold these principles? Yeah.
yeah, democracy. It's a good thing when it works. Yeah. All right. Well, to come to the very present moment for you, I like to ask folks what their right now question is. So that's beyond what's for lunch and who and if I'm going to get married and those bigger questions. And it kind of comes to just for yourself in the current moment. So, what is your right now question or the questions that you're carrying with you currently?
Mm. I think this might go deeper into what I've been thinking about at work, but how do we find the change agents in all of these fields? How do we find the people who care about agency? And how do we support them? And how do we connect them to each other? I think those are the questions. That kind of sequence of questions is what I've been asking myself in this moment, is how do we find the people who care about agency? How do we support them? How do we connect them to each other?
Which is lovely and kind of tying back to where we started from your ability to work in a field where the questions are exciting to you and
Mm.
engage you.
Yeah,
So the fact that these dovetail or overlap perfectly, it seems like you're the right person doing the right work right now.
I hope so.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you for that.
absolutely. For folks that want to connect with you or find out the things that you're doing, where's the best place for folks to find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn, but I think the best place is rightquestion.org. That's the Right Question Institute's website. And we run free quarterly trainings for people in working in different fields. There's lots of resources that are available for free on our network. And so there's lots of ways to engage with us on rightquestion.org, depending on what field you're interested in and where your interest is. So that's probably the best place.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, Naomi, thank you. Thank you for saying yes and coming on for this conversation because it's been long anticipated on my side
Mhm.
for being able to talk with somebody from the organization. And I love your background and the intention and the heart that you bring and the expansive view of agency. So
Well,
thank
thank
you
you,
for being
Dan.
here and part of this conversation.
Thank you for reaching out. And I just want to say it's rare for us to find people who think as deeply about questions as we do and about the power of questions. And so it's just a pleasure to come across your podcast and the work that you're doing. Just thank you for reaching out and for this conversation.
Absolutely. Ken here. This was a rich conversation. It was a joy to talk with Naomi as one who has spent years thinking daily about questions and how to encourage others to adopt the questioning practice. I am still unpacking the deep resonance I encountered when Naomi named the power of questions as agency. I have been unable to get that out of my mind since our conversation, and I am confident that it has been a missing piece in my definition of how I see the world regarding questions. There will be more to follow in the coming days on that particular point. As a reminder, the Curated Questions website homepage includes a link to record your answers to 2 questions for potential inclusion into an upcoming episode, and the opportunity to sign up for the newsletter that will hit your inbox every 2 weeks. Here are my 4 takeaways I've compiled from the episode. Number 1, from asking questions to teaching questions. Most people, and myself included, were forced on the questions they asked of other people, as opposed to how do you help other people ask their own questions. Naomi stated most people, and myself included, were focused on the questions they ask of other people, as opposed to how do you help other people ask their own questions. Naomi reveals that true power lies not in being the one asking questions, but in helping others develop their own questioning skills. The legal field exemplifies this. Professors, judges, and lawyers hold power through their questions, while those they serve remain passive recipients. When we shift from wielding question power to sharing it, we transform relationships from hierarchical to collaborative. The example of the young mother developing a parenting plan shows how teaching question skills creates lasting empowerment rather than temporary assistance. The skill becomes increasingly necessary as rights are stripped away and the need to question power becomes more pressing and costly. Question: instead of providing answers or asking all the questions yourself, how could you teach others to formulate their own powerful questions? Number 2, the 3-lens decision framework. Naomi and RQI's framework reveals that every decision can be examined through 3 critical lenses: reason, why was this made? Process, how was it made and by whom? And role, what can I do? Most people instinctively ask why questions, but struggle with process questions and often miss entirely role questions, particularly those accustomed to being subject to others' decisions rather than participating in them. This pattern reflects deeper power dynamics where some expect to be consulted while others expect to be told. When parents in New Mexico used this framework after a school shooting, they moved from feeling helpless to securing concrete policy changes. Question: when facing a decision that affects you, what questions are you not asking about the process and your potential role in it? Number 3, the divergent-convergent question process. The Right Question Institute teaches a deliberate 2-phase process. First, generate any and all questions without judgment, divergent thinking, then edit, prioritize, and refine them, convergent thinking. Naomi notes that traditional education often demands the, quote, right question immediately, which stifles exploration and disadvantages different thinking styles. This mirrors Kevin Kelly's observation that most questions aren't good. You must iterate through many to find the powerful ones. The process acknowledges that breakthrough questions often emerge from seemingly silly or tangential starting points. Question: what would change if you permitted yourself to ask terrible questions before expecting to get to the good ones? Number 4, questions as equity tools. Naomi frames questioning as fundamentally an equity issue. Who gets asked the questions? Who, in fact, asks the questions? And who doesn't ask the questions? Her work focuses on communities that don't enter schools because they don't know what questions to ask, or patients who don't realize they're allowed to question doctors. The ability to formulate questions becomes a form of social capital that can be deliberately taught and shared. When questioning skills are distributed more broadly, power dynamics shift and systems become more responsive to those they serve. Question: who in your sphere doesn't feel empowered to ask questions, and how could you help change that? Now it's your turn to share what resonates with you. To those on the other side of the speaker, thank you for being here. Gratitude shout out to Beauty Pill for the show's music and producer Ben Ford for the technical help. This episode was recorded on Piscataway land. Please engage with this episode in some manner. Download, follow, save, like, share, or comment about something that resonated. This action ensures we are engaging the questioning community. Until next time, keep questioning.